All right. Well, hello, welcome. My name is Charlie Dubbe. I'm the head of Regenerative Partnerships here at Agrology, and I have my colleague here, Dana Revallo, who's the head of customer success at Agrology. Welcome to this webinar. This is part of a series of webinars that we hold, bringing in experts in different realms. So soil health, carbon dynamics, regenerative transitions. And we're really excited about this conversation with Daphne Amory. And we'll be discussing regenerative transitions and also biodynamics and kind of how those things fit together. So, yeah, I'll have Daphne introduce herself in a second. But before we jump into that, we just have some quick housekeeping. So please keep yourself on mute. And then also please add questions into the chat. We love when these are really interactive, and oftentimes there's a really lively chat with people with questions and answers and opinions, and it's all welcome. So feel free to jump into the chat. We will send out a follow-up email with the recording and also with the slides that we go through today, and then also any extra materials that we think might be useful. And the last thing, I don't think we'll be sharing any customer data today, but we do take our customer data privacy quite seriously at Agrology. And so anytime we do share data, it's with the customer's permission. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen for 1 second. And Daphne, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you
great to
for,
have you.
it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, I would love, maybe we can just kick off with a little intro. Just tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to be where you're at.
Sure. It's one of those circuitous, organic journeys that I find myself where I am and think, geez, what a path, what a journey. But yeah, well, currently I work as a regenerative consultant advisor in the field. And how I came into this has been, I grew up I was raised on a large cattle ranch in Colorado. Probably not so large in today's standards, but at the time it was large enough for me as a child. And we were in the mountains, and I spent a lot of time by myself outdoors with just this incredible landscape of the western slope of Colorado. And they say that place informs, and I really think that being in that kind of an environment day in, day out, and listening to the sounds and participating in the seasonal growth systems and the rhythms of the ranch really informed how I think about life in general and what that means. And then when I left that beautiful agrarian landscape, mountainous landscape, I ended up in studying experimental theater, and that took me all around the world. And with that, began to take all of that rhythm and energy and motion that I learned that I pulled in from the outdoors and pulled it into the body. And then how does that translate? How do I deconstruct story and put it back out again in a different way? And through that, I found myself really in any work that I did, it had to be a combination of it had to bring in the natural environment and the human landscape, and then blend those together some way or another.
Hmm.
So that kind of brought me to all of the different work
Yeah,
areas that I've been in my life.
I love that. Can you tell us a little bit about where you've gotten your inspiration from in terms of your approach to viticulture or viniculture? And yeah, like what threads have you pulled on? Kind of what's your 30,000 foot view? How do you approach growing wine grapes?
So I think it started through one of my past careers was working as I managed a wine portfolio for a large distribution house on the East Coast, importing and distribution house. And the narrative of wine, for me, was a muse. How does the vine bring this story into life? And so I began through the multitudes of tastings of wines, I began to discern a difference. I wasn't sure what it was. And I was in Europe on a buying trip on one of my, you know, many week-long buying trips, and I was in Alsace, and I had been in side-by-side vineyards, looking at the different tasting the different wines. And I came into the second one and I tasted it, and I was with the wine grower, and I was like, whoa, holy mackerel, what am I tasting here? Why is this so different than your neighbor next door, or maybe a couple of vineyards down? And and the color, the light, everything about it just had a different quality. And he said, well, I practice biodynamics. And it was one of those moments, it's like, biodynamics. Wait, that lands in here somewhere, but I have no idea what that means. And so that took me down the rabbit hole. When I got back to the US, I just started reading. And um, what I what really came from that was, again, the recognition of holistic systems, of how we work, or how we are a part of, we are not separate from. Coming back to what I spoke about just a few minutes ago, about as a child, living into the seasons, living into the rhythm very gently, and participating in that. And again, a circular, from beginning to end and coming back around again. And so that, I believe, is what really began that formation for me of how I work. I mean, of working particular to vineyards, viticulture, and larger agricultural land systems.
Mm,
If that
That's
makes any
incredible.
sense, but
love it.
Yeah, of course. I find the same thing when I was in Europe, finding out that a lot of these old French wine houses are all farming biodynamically, when on the outside there it's very conservative, and but they're using these esoteric principles to
yeah.
just really maximize the terroir. So what are the steps that you take when you start working with a client? When you first start working together, how do you build that process?
And if you want,
So
I can pull up your slides whenever you want, because I know that was kind of part of this answer. So you just let me know.
yeah, that would be great. Why don't we go ahead and pull up the first one, and then I can kind of talk through that. Thanks. So the first thing we do, if I'll use this slide just as a questioning place. We start with inquiry. Why are we doing what we're doing? What's the impulse behind this? What is it that one wants to achieve? Sort of, how does one see oneself in one's environment? And I love using this slide here because when we look at it, I mean, what do you see, Dana? What do you see, Charlie? I'll ask you.
Um, wow, I see a lot of different pieces, and then it kind of filters my thoughts into kind of a common common area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see sort of similar thing, like these like if I like block out the centerpiece, it's kind of all this incongruous pieces that maybe don't necessarily relate, but then as you look towards the center, it's like this beautiful gateway or some sort of kind of portal, and all of the angles of all the pieces kind of start to make sense and fit together, you know?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually a sculpture by Andy Goldsworthy, and it is a reflection. So he's created this um, twig element. It's only half of it. The rest is a reflection on water.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very dimensional piece, as well as a reflection of, and what you said, it's bringing these natural things together into a focus. And so for me, we begin to talk about, this will lead me into talking about, well, what is it that, what are our assumptions? What are our known understandings? What is it that we do? And so from there, we got, and the fact that it's also highly organic material that's being used here, and the water to reflect. But in the next slide, it's we then begin to look at that. I take you through the classic iceberg. And again, this is just sort of an outline of how I would work with somebody in introducing the work at hand. And we look at what are the current realities and the behaviors and events that we're seeing. Then what are the structures that are shaping those behaviors and events? So again, what are we understanding of where we are in place? What is it that we have? What do we know? What shapes those? And this is from the human elements as well as the physical elements, the landscape elements, so the natural and the built environments together. And then coming into what beliefs and mental modes are shaping those structures. Because before we can change anything, when we look at regenerative practices, regenerative design, holistic systems, biodynamics, whatever you want to name it, we have to think about how we're changing our own internal paradigm.
I love that. One of my good friends, just like another kind of version of this, Gabe Brown often talks about, he's like, I'm not afraid of hard pans or layers of compaction in soil. It's the mental hard pans that really are the sticking point. Like mental compaction is so much harder to break through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have to challenge our own assumptions. But if we don't know what they are first, then how do we challenge them? Then we just become defensive about it. And it's like, oh, no, don't go there. Right? So we have to be able to put it out in front of us and see what it is. And that's why also it's below the iceberg, right? It's those things that we don't often pull up and look at. And then what are the levels of awareness that shape the beliefs and the mental models? And then you start to build back up again. What levels of awareness do we need to be operating from if we're making this change? We've created a mission statement. We know what the goals are. We're looking at that. So then we have to, I should have said that in the very beginning. That's part of the current reality of where we want to go across to that future vision. And then so we start by going across first, but then we come up and around. And what do we need to change? What's going to support these models? So it's not right or wrong, good or bad. What do we need to support the mental models that we're looking at? And then what are the structures that are needed? So what do we actually have to build? What needs to physically change to do this? And then what behaviors and events would we like to see as an outcome? So there you go. There's how are we going to get to what we want to do? And then how do we challenge that, change it, et cetera? What are our assumptions? So I think it's the next slide. I just love this picture too, because through this looping that we're doing, going from the bottom, and then back up around, what we're doing is we're moving from an egocentric thinking system into an eco-centric thinking system. So it puts us back in the middle of it, that we are not in control of what we're doing, but we are in relationship to what we are doing and how we're doing it and who we're doing it with and what we're doing it with. So this one, this comes from asknature.org, which is biomimicry, basically. So if we're working within a holistic system, a natural ecosystem, building natural ecosystems for health, then we need to reconnect ourselves into them, as that earlier picture looked at, ego to eco. So we need to have this awareness that we're not separate from what we do, but we're deeply connected within it. It's all a reciprocal relationship. That's who we are. That's how we sense. That's how we engage in the world. Then we emulate the scientific research-based practice of learning from and then replicating nature's forms, processes, and ecosystems to create more regenerative designs. Biomimicry, what works? How do we understand that? And then through our own intelligence and is in science, current science, how do we begin to bring that together?
Hmm.
And then the ethos of the realization that we have a responsibility. We're a part of, we are deeply embedded in this world, but we've only been here for a blip. So we have a responsibility to live with and abide by the planetary boundaries and principles in which we are a part of. So that's it. Again, you got to go way out in order to come way in. But if we don't have a common language of understanding the work that we're going to do together at hand and what's in front of us, then it starts to become very rote and short-term, short-sighted, So again, the next slide. Please, thank you. And then understanding our vineyard practices as syntropic systems. Well, what is a syntropic system? It's a natural process translated to interventions which refer to form, function, and dynamics. Leverage points. What are the leverage points that we can find that begin to elevate ourselves within that natural environment and the work that we're doing? So how are we quantifying, qualifying, and amplifying the work that we do? And how can we work within nature's boundaries without imposing our own? How do we translate our designed boundaries to complement the natural? So again, what is set? What is not set? What are we imposing? What are we not imposing? What is there for us to create permeability with or not? And what do we need to ask so that we can recognize that? And then if those boundaries are ever shifting because we know nature is ever changing, then what do we need to be doing in our own design time through this? So again, looking out at a vineyard over 100 years, what is it that we need to be doing within that time period so that we are meeting what we know is coming forward or not know what's coming forward, and how can we best prepare for that? So the next slide, please. So through that, basically what we've done is we've defined our practice, we've defined what our success will look like through identifying, quantifying, creating, and then eventually implementing.
Amazing.
And I think that was the last, and the last slide, always find the leverage points. So finding the leverage points within a complex system where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything. It's a quote from Donella Meadows. And I love this because a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything. And when we think about quantum physics, I'll just take it sideways for a moment. When you think about quantum physics and what we know about the quantum world is that the smallest particle carries the greatest information. That's there, that's out there. So if we think about what's the smallest movement that we make, and then the ripple effect of that, or the energetic body that that's going to create, it's pretty powerful. We don't have to make enormous changes. All we have to do is begin by making these small changes, as long as we keep the recognition that we're in a complex system there. So that's how I work.
Um,
Fantastic. I love like that. Finding the leverage points reminds me of just finding that momentum with nature and working with nature.
Yeah,
Trying to make these big changes, you just have to make sure that your observation skills are in check and finding the way that things are moving and then move with it.
right. It's a sensing, right? You have to sense into what is present so that you can begin to ride with it.
yeah, exactly.
Love
Find
it.
that wave and then kind of amplify it, right? Instead of
Yeah,
trying to fight against that wave.
right.
On that exact theme, you have this wonderful line about quantifying, qualifying, and amplifying, our interventions or our regenerative practices or, these points of leverage, what are some tools that you use for especially those kind of first two, quantifying, qualifying, like, in other words, how do you encourage the people that you work with to listen to their vines, the soil that are supporting the vines, the ecosystem within that the vineyard is kind of living within? Yeah.
First, first we have to get a baseline. What's here? I mean, from the very basics of when was this planted? What did it look like beforehand? What does it look like now? What's the health? What are the pressures that we're facing? Disease, environment in which we're in, the ecosystem that we're living in. And that at times can go as far out as like project right now, bringing in Point Blue conservation science to help us understand actually what is the environment, the ecosystem that we're living in, where they're monitoring the flora, the fauna, and the fungi, so to speak. Working with folks like you to understand what's happening in the soils below, what's happening in through the climate above. So really getting a strong snapshot of what is this right now, right here, and what's brought it to that. That's critical. Got to understand the past in order to see where we are in the present so that we can begin to move towards the future and make those informed decisions.
Mhm. There
But
seems to be this amazing element to all of this of really like place-based inquiry, kind of
Yeah.
this like curiosity and this process that is both emergent and also very iterative. Um, and yeah, it's something that we think about a lot at Agrology and really like encourage our clients to embark on, or I think in one form or another, really every farmer worth their salt is doing this, right? Every farmer is trying something out and seeing what the results are. And I think that sort of the most interesting and powerful use case I've seen for our technology is exactly there, right? It's just like
Mhm.
it's like an earpiece or like a hearing aid or something to allow us to kind of observe and hear better what is happening in those soils or in the carbon cycling of the system and the movement of energies in the system as different programs or practices or interventions are being experimented with. And my question or my curiosity is I think I think a lot of times we have, as humans, we have a tendency to sort of throw up our hands and sort of be like, well, the authorities say this, right? Like, oh, well, the researchers say that, I need to no-till. It's the only way to build soil. And if I till, then like that's really terrible. What's your experience or like how do you guide clients in terms of sort of taking the power back into their hands or doing kind of their own place-based research? Is that a part of how you work with people?
Yes. Yeah, I have to, or I mean, I feel like I have to in the sense that every place, every site, nothing is identical. So first of all, we have to understand where we are and what that's like. And then um, what is this in where we are in time and place? And then how do we begin to, right, just lost my train of thought. Sorry, I had to bring it back in again. Um, what is right for where we are at this moment in time? And what does that look like? And that we, again, this is that beginning to challenge those assumptions of what we think might be right. Um, and so removing the right or wrong, but what is it that we feel that we're able to observe through the technology that we have that tells us this story, our observations that tell us this story, how do they come together? Do they come together? Are they in sync? Is there some synergy there or not? And then through trial and error, because that's how we work, that's how we learn about where we are, trial and error with that observation and the scientific, our human observation abilities, and then the scientific knowledge to help back it up or turn us in a different direction. We can begin to, address the practices that we need to look at. So that's a little, like I said, I lost my train of thought there. What I really should be saying is there are no absolutes ever, because so much of it is dependent on where we are and what that ecosystem, what the values of that ecosystem are already bringing forth, and what we are doing. Again, if we're trying to quantify, qualify, and then amplify, we need to be aware of what it is that's going to truly amplify it. Because if we want a system that is living, that is balancing itself, that is intuitive in its, if we want our vineyard to be intuitive within its ecosystem, as a part of that ecosystem, then we have to be sensitive enough to know that whatever action we take, are we disrupting, or are we creating a new emerging reality for that vineyard? So what does that look like? Are we strengthening it, or are we potentially weakening it? So back to till, no till, again, depends on what is it that needs to happen right that moment for the greater picture down the road. So long term, always thinking long term. Going back to the smallest action can have the largest effect down the road. How do we know, though, that that's the right action? We're not going to know until we try it and begin to measure it against all of the other factors that we have.
Yeah.
Complicated answer. There's no, you can't say yes, no, this is it, this is not it.
Totally. You're reminding me, it's a great moment. I'm going to do a little pitch. We are doing a field day down at Zaca Mesa with Jordan Lonberg, who was the viticulturalist for Tablas Creek, a really amazing regenerative, and then also Kane Thompson. We work with both of them. But that's the theme of the whole of our workshop. So we'll probably include it in the email as like a follow-up for folks. But if anyone's down in Santa Barbara or Paso and they want to join, and we're going to be talking about exactly that, right? That it's actually regenerative is complicated and it's nuanced, and that's what's so fun and exciting about it, is it's all in the gray areas, right? Life isn't black and white. For way too long, our agriculture has approached life as if it was black and white, right? Like this is bad, this is the bad bugs, and these are the good bugs, and it's not that simple. And
If
so
you
yeah,
remove all the bad bugs, then what's there for the good bugs? And they'll disappear too. And if just
exactly.
All part of the
I mean,
balance.
these are living systems. We are in that living system. We are a part of that living system. If we eradicate something, what's going to take its place?
What's going to eradicate us?
Right.
So, Daphne, you and I met probably 15 or 20 years ago through biodynamics.
We did.
Yeah, I was wondering, so how do you use biodynamics in part of your practices as complements to a regenerative agriculture system? And what kind of similarities or differences do you see between like a regenerative approach versus a biodynamic approach?
Yeah, there's a slight nuance there for me, Dana, in that, and I appreciate this question greatly because, um, again, for me, it's about living systems. It's about holism. And so, what's the toolbox that we work in these natural systems? And uh, biodynamics for me is in my practice is really about moving into rhythm. What is the rhythm that I need to understand or be aware of in order to, again, going back to that word amplify, bring a plant or bring a system, allow a system to amplify at its highest note. It's like tuning in the old radio dials when it get all crackly and you're trying to get that clear sound to come in. That's rhythm for me, is how am I getting into that clear sound? Whoop, boom. Within the rhythm of the system that I'm in. So the plant's rhythm, the system of the moon, the sun, the greater cosmic systems that we are all very much of, no matter how much we want to say we're not or think that we're not. And so when I think of when I use the term regenerative, for me, it's like, well, isn't that generative? Isn't all of that, if we're working in these systems, if we're living in these systems, then we are generative. We are in that regenerative pattern. And so again, I'm taking it out very theoretically. If I bring it back into practice, the practice of biodynamics is a sense of listening. It's a sense of tuning in, using the toolbox of nature, understanding what happens when you bring different living forces together to create a third living force, a potentially stronger living force, such as a fermentation, and then working with that within the system itself. So using that as part of the tool. In regenerative, in what we call regenerative agriculture, sorry, this is very long-winded, all of that is in there. It's just, we're just expanding our toolbox in a way that allows us to engage back into that living system. So how one defines the practices of that is going to, again, be, as long as we're moving in a holistic rhythm within a holistic system, working in a circular manner, not a linear, then what we use in that toolbox just gets larger and larger and larger. That to me is the excitement of both of them. So I don't define myself as I'm purely biodynamic. Well, biodynamic means living, right? It's of life. Regenerative means to generate new life and to continue that cycle. So these are just part of our language that I have a problem with. We have to define, as you said earlier, Charlie, it's either good or bad, black or white. You're biodynamic, you're regenerative. Well, why, how come they're not both? It's just the practices that we choose and the tools that we choose within that to do the work that we have at hand.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the part of thinking of it as what you said of as forces rather than, more of a material approach.
Yeah. So you say it much more eloquently than I do and clearly.
Dana's got quite the background in biodynamics as well, from what I understand.
He does. His farms were beautiful when I would visit them and be there.
Yeah.
The way he would speak about it was great. I loved
Yeah.
it.
We're lucky to have him.
Thank you. So can you walk us through this beautiful project you have with Joseph Phelps, where Agrology and you are partnering with their viticulture team in this really innovative redevelopment project? We're
Yeah.
really excited about this, and yeah, maybe you can give us a kind of a high level approach of what your philosophy was and how you're going about it.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different elements there with
There are.
culture design and agroforestry and
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe actually a good place to start is, what was the original impetus? So yeah, what started this project, and then tell us about
Right.
how it's been unfolding.
So the impetus behind it was the recognition that in our current viticultural world, we're pulling vines every 17, 20 years due to disease pressures, economic reasons. The health of the system is very much out of balance. And so if Joseph Phelps is looking at creating the highest quality wine out there that is the most representative of its site, of the Napa Valley and where it is. Well, how to do that is we have to have really healthy vines. We have to have healthy ecosystems. We have to be able to work in towards longevity, because if we want to be financially responsible in that, we need to look for the long term as well. If we want to be responsible to the ecosystem in which we're in, then again, we have to be building and partnering in reciprocity within the larger ecosystem. So how do we understand the micro within the macro? So from that, again, began to look at, well, what is it that's going to begin to tie these systems together? How do we build healthy soil? We build healthy soil through, and how do we encourage a system to heal itself and to continue to grow? So through biodiversity is one of the first factors right there. Well, what is biodiversity? What does that look like? And we began to implement the concept of agroforestry, rooting systems, the ability to draw water in through plant life, connect our systems together, not have these monocultures of vineyard block, contiguous vineyard blocks next to each other, but begin to tie them together through agroforestry. Develop rooting systems that allow information to be shared through that incredible soil highway, the mycorrhizal highways that are underneath there. Build that fungi in there, build it so that the sharing of resources happens below ground as well as above ground. And who's sharing those resources? Well, it's again this polyculture, from trees to cover cropping systems to bushing systems, native, non-native, really begin to build this in and connect into its own ecosystem. So Joseph Phelps itself has, it's a wonderful property in that it's the main ranch, the home ranch, is about 600 plus acres of only 120 planted into vine. The rest is Phelps put it into, in the earlier days, into the Napa Land Trust. And so there's forever wildlands there with vineyard blocks interspersed throughout. And so one thing is to look at that and think, well, wait a minute, why are we separating these vineyard blocks from the natural landscape that's already there? How can we bring them together, create synergy through that? Again, those syntropic systems that we talked about earlier that I mentioned, and encourage that to communicate together, to work together. Which then we begin to increase, the winged life, the birds, again, the flora, the fauna, and the fungi. Everything begins to grow out of that so that our pressures are corrected within the natural system that we're creating and building. Hydrology is a huge piece of that as well. There's this, the form of Phelps, of the ranch, has this beautiful hydrological system coming through. And so how do we begin to capture that so that we're not losing everything as it runs out? How do we take the water that's coming through and enliven it so that it's, by the time it leaves the ranch, in however way it leaves, whether it's by going into the aquifer or heading out into the Napa River, it is more enlivened than when it arrived, in whatever form that was, via rain, through the creeks, sheeting, et cetera, et cetera. So capturing those, creating these microclimates of small pondings or beaverings, we can call them, through these streamings, so that we're creating microclimates with our tree systems, with our water systems, with our cover cropping systems, and then begin to connect them through these natural systems all the way through, so that we're encouraging the elements themselves.
Wow,
Jump
that's
in.
so cool. I mean, what an innovative approach to taking all of these things into context and creating this redevelopment rather than just which way is easy for the tractor to turn around at the end of the row, right?
Yeah.
The way a lot of these vineyards have been planned out, and that's really inspiring.
It truly takes holistic and it like what oftentimes I think people think about as holistic and it expands it a whole other layer or two.
Yeah. Agroecology, agroforestry, polyculture, permaculture, throw in biodynamics if you want. But
Yeah.
literally, it's taking all of these systems together and really trying to understand how that's going to support the end goal that we spoke of, which is the highest quality wine from
Mhm.
its place.
And probably also with the longest redevelopment windows possible as well, right? Like
Oh,
really
yeah.
old
Yeah.
vines, because I know those old vines, they do have this like wisdom. They have this, just like humans do. We develop not only yeah, there's sort of almost an epigenetics
Right.
can be unlocked
Right.
in terms of that
Right.
resiliency. I'm super curious if you could share just briefly about some of the kind of more technical nitty-gritty. So in the agroforestry
Mhm.
integration, how many trees are you doing? Are you doing trees every few rows? Are they interspersed within a vine row? Like what is the, how are you actually going to be planting
Yeah.
these trees?
Right.
Such an amazing idea.
Really, yeah.
So the concept, this came from Alain Canet, who's working in France right now, and so he and I are working as uh, consultants together on this project, and he implemented this at Cheval Blanc, and he's calling it the living organ. So if you think of a vineyard block as a living organ, the membrane is our trees that are surrounding it, that are helping to enclose it, to, that allow for that habitat, as well as the rooting systems, again, creating, the wind. It creates, again, just think of this enclosure, that's our membrane. Uh, and then within that, about every um, 1,500 feet or so, we're creating a spine that runs straight through. It's about 2 vineyard rows width, maybe 15 feet. I mean, the exact measurements I have, but I'm trying to pull them up off the top of my head at the moment. About 15 feet wide, we've got a spine running through it, which is beginning to connect back out to that membrane. We're calling it the spine because, again, we're thinking of the body.
Mhm.
And we're thinking of the organs of this body, with our body being the vineyard block. And that is a mix of trees and shrubs. So again, multi-storied, again, habitat, as well as buffers, etc. Then within the vineyard rows themselves, every third row will begin to intersperse smaller trees that will be within the vineyard row itself. So literally every third vine, in between the vine will be a tree system.
A fruit tree, a native tree, a
Fruiting
mix.
tree, a soft wood tree, something that can be pruned, something that again will be growing with the vines. So
Mhm.
whether, and again, some of them depending on their shape, we still need to be able to move tractors through, et cetera, et cetera. But what this is, when you have these softer wood trees and you're pruning them along, they shed their roots faster,
Mm.
which helps to build that biomass and fungi matter in the soil and create that whole, we're beginning to build in the soil, as well as we're able to prune them, they move, they grow at the same pace as those vines do. So we're really working that. So think about it now. If you think of what what a vineyard block in Napa looks like, and it's a lot of
Hmm.
sunlight. You got these rows going like this, maybe something around the outside a little bit, maybe. And you begin to build this all in, and now you're building it's a true ecosystem in and of itself through there. But again, it's soil, it's what's below ground is also supporting what's above ground. So not only do these spines and these trees work with their rooting systems and creating a different type of air movement, light quality, et cetera, et cetera. We're also creating the habitat for the bees, the bats, the birds, all of that to help with our pressures and to build
Hmm.
that. And then covering all of that, I should say, the skin, of course, is our cover cropping systems. So there will be perennial systems. We're taking the time to build those perennial systems in right now by creating rotational cover crops over the next 3, 4, 7, 10 years as we build out our membranes. So, and
What
then,
is can you tell us a little bit more about that cover cropping? It sounds like it's sort of a succession
yeah,
planting and
yeah.
planting process. So I guess just like high level, obviously it's probably a very biodiverse mix. Are you starting more with annuals and then moving towards perennials, or what is, yeah, take us through kind of
Yeah.
the process of building that skin.
Right. So what we're looking at first and foremost is building biomass and rooting systems. So biomass that we can then work with. We're also not looking at tilling the soil through this process. So what we're working with right now is, or that's an objective. So what we're looking at is seasonal cover crop systems that have a high biomass, also have built into them some insectary materials as well, so flowering plants as well as grains. I mean, we're thinking high biomass right now, and if we're thinking the summer seasons, we're going to be working with grains like rye and barleys and oats, wheats, things of that nature, mixed in with some flowering plants at different percentages. In the wintertime, we'll move more into those cooler cropping systems. So again, be looking at some leguminous, some again, different grain systems that will support that. What we'll do after that is, in order to move from one season to the next season, is we're looking at working with animals, taking that down as fast as we can, crimping it potentially, and then overseeding so that we're using this mass to begin to build layer upon layer as it decomposes, again, creating airways. I mean, just you think of the incredible living systems that are going to be coming from that. So that's our soil build. That's how we're building it from the top down as well as the bottom up.
That's so cool. When you had initially, I want to go back to the point where you said the living organ. I had
Mhm.
initially thought about the musical the instrument, you know,
Oh, the organ,
through,
yeah.
through like all of the different pieces that you're bringing are all different harmonics, and you're creating this harmonic system,
I
this
love that.
note, right? That
Yeah.
little piece, and then I also see the biology piece of it, the living organ, where all these different pathways help bring in and out different energies
Hmm.
throughout that organism.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that picture. Thank you.
I know I was just thinking of a wine label with like a organ with legs or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's the inclusion of so many pieces to this because again, not one thing is the solution if we're trying to build a healthy, circular environment, or holistic environment. So working with animals, working with everything that's out there. The water, again, is another piece of it. That's what we're calling our lung. That's the breathing organism of all of this. And as we build in these tree systems, we're cooling things down. As we cover those soils and keep them covered, we're cooling things down. We're bringing that back down again. Because as we know right now, everything is just heating up. So we're able to allow those vines to work in a way, we're hoping, this is a theory, we're allowing those vines to work synergistically in their environment, partnering with these other plants to really work in the balance of what they have.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of Charlie and I were just at Napa Rise these past couple weeks, and there's a lot of talk about this bioregional cooling systems, right?
Mhm.
By integrating different projects where a lot of neighboring vineyards are all going to have to be working together to create these bioregional cooling systems. So that's
Yeah, it's a huge piece. There's this great comment in the chat here about an old training system for vines. So this is from Ariana. She said the vite maritata. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's a training system in which the grapevine was actually tied to a tree, an elm, a poplar, or a maple, and they were growing together with it in this sort of symbiotic relationship. This technique, introduced by the Etruscans and then later developed by the Romans, was not only an agricultural method, but also an early form of agroforestry. So I
Yes.
love just that, again, like we're going back in a lot of ways. We're going back to these older styles of agriculture in which agriculture was much more interwoven not only with the ecologies that surrounded the farm, but also with the natural cycles. So much so that I think at a certain point we get to a place where we can have an authentic conversation about like where does one begin and one end, right? It's just this flowing of energy. Between the natural world and our world. And as you said, we're such a key part of that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's those permeable boundaries, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's where you begin to do this. And none of this is new. We're not reinventing a wheel. All we're doing is we're learning from the past again in order to bring it forward into the future with our own learnings of what we know today due to our scientific understanding, our own curiosities
Hmm.
of furthering that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pulling on that thread, how do you see sort of new technologies, right? We have so many new ways of learning and learning about the world, hearing the ecology, listening to the soil. Obviously, Agrology, we're really excited to be partnered in this Joseph
Yes.
Phelps project. But there's also, all the new DNA sequencing, metagenomic technologies. So how do you view bringing in sort of this really innovative technology along with these really, these older practices or these older sort of paradigms of agriculture? Can those live together happily? Do they complement each other? Are there places where you see friction between them? Tell us about how you are thinking about integrating technology into all of this.
Yeah. That's a huge topic right there. You know,
Another
um,
2 hours on that.
right. But as far as integration, it's um, so we have to start somewhere with an assumption, right? And from that assumption, we're able to use these new technologies that are coming in to either quantify or qualify. Is it right? Is it what we want to go forward with? What are we learning from that? But if we use that purely only to define an understanding of something, then I find that we take ourselves out of the equation. And if we use that purely, if we use a technology purely to make a decision going forward, to choose an action going forward, then we remove our own self out of that. And we have to be able to bring those two together. So new technologies for me, as things come down the road, it's more about what are we doing? How are we working, looking at to again amplify the health of a living system? So what are the tools that we need to do that? And how do we understand that in real time? How do we understand that right now, rather than a snapshot of something, a one-dimensional linear picture of what it was? So if I'm, again, that brings back in the tools that you use at Agrology is it does bring that living time element in so that we understand what is happening. What are these communication systems? What's the chatter that's going on all around us all the time? And what do we need to tune into in order to be able to bring that to the next level? How do we support the system to be better at what it is? Again, generalities, because I can't go into DNA, genetics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I do know is that we have to be very careful not to diminish through our
Mm.
sciences. If I think about genetics, so I think about what we're doing there, that we're not diminishing the capacity of the original plant plant's intelligence. So how are we allowing it to be its most intelligent within the system in which it is embedded?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever we do in the scientific world and the technological world to support that intelligence in a whole bodied way, a whole systems way again, then let's go.
Yeah. I've been really, really loving learning from a lot of different folks, but about this idea of quorum sensing within the
Yeah.
soil microbiome.
Oh
So
God, yeah. Yeah.
essentially, if you know, for folks who aren't familiar, what happens is once you get a certain level of microbial activity and diversity, and there definitely is a certain kind of baseline you need, but once you're up above that, the soil microbiome and the rhizosphere become a giant one organism essentially. And so all of the way I like to think about it is it's the soil microbiome becomes this massive sensory organ for
Mhm.
all of the plants. And all of the plants are also part of this collective sensory organ. So the cover crop is actually, for example, feeling a pest, right? And then it's signaling the soil microbiome through the mycorrhizal fungi and through, also even bacterial cells that are being transported in that mycorrhizal, those highways. It is signaling the vines, it's signaling all the other cover crops, and all of a sudden, then through a quorum sensing, that entire system will develop an immunity to that specific pest. It says, "Oh, we've got aphids going out of control. All right, everybody, like produce this one uh, phytohormone, right, or something." And I think that there's this incredible quorum sensing that happens. And then where my mind goes is like, how can we actually participate in that quorum sensing? Like,
Yeah.
if we're saying that the entire thing becomes a superorganism, so all of the soil microbial communities plus all of the plants, why would we, draw a line there? Like, aren't we participating in that? And we're actually sensing on behalf of the vine and feeding into that quorum sensing. Oh, we need a little irrigation here. Oh, we need
That's what I mean by we can't remove ourselves from it because we are so deeply embedded in it, right? We are a part of that larger organism, the sensing and those communication highways that happen between this tree over here talking to that tree over there, talking to the vine, saying, hey, we got something going on here. They are always talking. Always, 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 always. We just haven't developed the ability, or we are beginning, like this much, beginning to tune into that, to learn to listen. We're beginning to hear part of that language that's going on. And that's the quorum sensing for me is that, again, there's so much we don't know, so
Yeah.
much we don't know, which is why it's so exciting to be in this time right now of inquiry and curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
not only for vine health, but think about all of those chemical interactions that are happening within the microbial networks that actually affect terroir, right? I mean, we talk about terroir just being a sense of time and place and minerality in the soil, but all of those environmental factors are filtered through the soil microbiome. And so you're
Yep.
getting this just accentuated flavor profiles.
And so
Hmm.
that's again, that's part of the research we're doing too, is, what are we understanding in the soils? And then how does that translate? What's the genetic material? What's the DNA, et cetera, et cetera? What's the biological material that is transmitted through that grape? And how does that go through fermentation? What does that taste like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So again, that's the loop, right?
Yeah.
At Joseph Phelps, is there a plan to bring kind of keep it separate all the way through so that we can look at, grape quality and wine quality from these sort of different systems?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, it is. Got lots of little fermentation tanks ready to go. But yeah, no, the winemakers there are incredible in how they're really looking at this. Rebecca John, who is to me, she's pulling all of this information together. She is just the way she formats and asks questions and lines things up is beautiful. And so she's really on it as far as where is this going to go? What do we need to know? Who do we have to bring in? And so that I
Mm,
can better understand what I'm doing in the winery and what is that going to taste like in the long run and how does that correlate to all of the practices that we're doing. So she's asking these great questions at the wine level that are helping the growing team to then tie it together as we look at the larger system together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the future. What do you
Okay.
expect to see in the next 10 years in the valley, in grape growing and wine growing, viniculture and beyond?
What do I expect to see in the next 10 years? Um, Going on and beyond. I see ourselves definitely moving away from monocultures. I hope to see, I think there'll be a shakeout definitely as we go forward here. Um,
I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of pressure from that in the disease pressure and the red
Mhm.
blotch and
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, with that shakeout, I think there's going to be a real reckoning with how are we growing? What are we doing? How are we interacting in this here in the Napa Valley in particular, in this beautiful valley? But I work internationally, so the same questions are being asked all around the world right now as to what are we learning from grapes? What are we learning from wine? What are we learning? They've been with us for so long. We, in our culture, and we've been a part of their culture as well. They've really trained us. And I feel like they're taking this moment to retrain us to say, no, 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 this isn't the way you do it. Let's take a look again at what we need to be doing. Um, so in the future, I just I'm so excited by the conversations that are happening, by the questions that are being asked about how do we begin to re-engage? How do we as humans, how do we as practitioners begin to re-engage in this culture that we've found ourselves in or that we are a part of, that we're building? Um, and I really hope to see in the next 10 years that continues to come together in community and that we all learn from each other and not continue to work in silos. And
Mhm.
so through that, we truly build a strong community and healthy community going forward. Where we're not afraid to ask questions. It's wide open.
Well said. Well, I'm just noting the time. So we're at our top of our hour here. We do have quite a few questions that came through in the chat. So if it's okay
Okay.
with you, Daphne, maybe we'll just do some of those. We'll get through as many as we can. We might not be able to hit all of them. But for anyone who's got to jump, thanks so much for joining us. We will send out the recording so you can kind of catch up on the rest of it. So yeah, just jumping into some of the questions. We have a question from Pam around, do you know if anyone's done any sort of side-by-side measurement of a regenerative viticulture program kind of versus a biodynamics and seeing the differences between the two? I know that oftentimes there's a lot of overlap, right? So she was pointing out both Tablas and Robert Hall were biodynamic, and then now they're, really leaning into sort of the ROC, which again, I think you made such a good point earlier about like labeling. It's a double-edged sword, right? Any of these
Right. They haven't left their practices behind, their biodynamic practices behind.
totally, totally.
It's still incorporated within. And
Yeah.
if anything, it informed them, helped to inform going forward. I mean, if we look at ROC in particular, just for a little sidebar, quick sidebar, that certification was built off of the Demeter certification. It was a jump off of to to broaden it a little bit. So yeah, labeling is hard. And to come back to Pam's question, regenerative is so broad in that point that there are trials going on all the time. I mean, you're working with some of them yourselves in agrology, and where you're looking at those side-by-side trials. In Europe, there are definite side-by-side trials going on. I know there are some here as well. I mean, I guess you could, Tablas Creek, I believe they integrated, so they didn't do side by side. It is an integration. Again, I really hesitate to separate the two because they can complement each
Mhm.
other when you begin to, again, work out of that much larger natural toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So another just great specific question from Pam was, what does it mean to shed the roots? So can you talk about root shedding, either of a tree or cover crop or whatever? What does that mean?
This is dying root systems. So those are the smaller rooting systems that begin to die off. And softer trees or softer wood they grow much faster, so their rooting systems are constantly regenerating themselves, regenerating. So those when it sheds the roots, it means that it's literally it's new growth. You know, it's like you shed your cuticles, you shed your hair, new growth that happens. And that those older roots then become part um, of the soil system itself. So they are part of the decomposition material that is incorporated, eaten up, utilized, etc., and
Yeah.
from the fungi.
And also probably building really nice pore spit systems, right?
Oh,
Building
yes,
really great channels
absolutely.
for water and for air to penetrate.
And
Really,
light
you
and
know,
yeah,
really nice.
everything. It creates these incredible super duper highways. And then as they decompose, new things can come in through there. So,
We have a question, a specific one from Tim about regenerative practices. So he says that many of the growers that he works with, or maybe many of our growers in New York, have been doing practices that could be considered regenerative since the mid 80s. So, cover cropping, no tillage, incorporating additions such as straw mulch and vineyard rows, soil organic matter in the 3 to 4% range, and also vineyards kind of being entwined with woods, gorges, and open fields. And his question is, have they been practicing regenerative farming since the early 90s? So in a lot of ways, this gets back to that same question, right? Like, is a rose by any other name? We put these names and labels and categories on things to understand them. And inherently, as we do that, we kind of lose some of the nuance, right? Especially the energy of it.
right.
One way that I like to think about these things is it's like capturing wind in a cardboard box. You like, oh, you got it. But then is it really wind at that point? Once you got it in the box?
Yeah. What an image. What a picture. No, because is it right? It's lost its the factors that allow it to be the wind.
Kind of the classic human folly, right? In order to understand
Yeah,
things, we need to throw them in a box. But as soon as we throw
right.
them in a box, we lose,
Uh-huh.
we lose something by throwing things in boxes.
Yeah, so Tim, yeah, I mean, regenerative farming again, it's nothing new, right? All we're doing is saying, oh, wow, we're taking these elements of other pieces that we know have worked and we're finding them to work again because we went so far to what hasn't worked to now we're beginning to come back. You know, it's this balancing act. So it's like cooking. You know, you find the pieces, you find the right ingredients that you want to make that beautiful soup that you do, and you blend them and you taste it and you blend it and you know and you keep adding new things and pretty soon you've got something that's really juicy and yummy and delicious and you know it's going to nurture you. It's going to feed you. Well, that's that's what farming is, you know. Like you gotta find these elements that are going to feed and nurture it all. So that, you know, we're still in the beginning naming phases. We'll continue to name after regenerative. There's going to be something else down the road, believe me.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. We got a question from Shija George, who I think is at the University of Florida, if I'm correct. We've chatted with her a bunch. She's just wondering, what scale of operations do you work with?
Ooh. Um, I have worked, the smallest has been a 1 acre operation to an 18,000 acre operation.
Oh, full
Yeah,
spectrum.
yeah, yeah. And again, polycultures. So the majority of my work is wine based, is wine growing based, but that I have worked in on cattle operations, in you know, large scale farming operations. I've worked in again Mediterranean climates to jeepers, you know, from Hawaii to Spain to South Africa to Washington, Vermont to Florida, Arizona, so again, it's all around. It's
Incredible.
mixed because the tenets are the same. It's how we approach the work itself.
Yeah. Dana, you got any last questions?
Yeah, we did have one last question for you is what is one book that you'd recommend or that's inspired you?
Well, I can't say a specific book, but recently I pulled this out because I just finished it the other day. I've been reading a lot of Stefano Mancuso. He's he's a plant neurobiologist. The Nation of Plants is one of the many that I have by him. Um, and I love his understanding plant neurobiology, again, communication systems. What are they doing? How are they talking? And how are we listening? Are we? What does that look like? And again, whatever book I read, it leads me to another. I'm an avid reader. I normally have 4 or 5 books going at any given time. That was what started me on this path again through biodynamics, was by reading and then into the doing and the action, and so I think any book that leads you into inquiry of something else, brilliant. For me recently, it's been Mancuso's work. I find him to be quite soul satisfying.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Can't wait to read that one. I was just jotting it down. Right up my alley.
Yeah. And they're all translated, so he's Italian.
Okay.
But he's an incredible neurobiologist. And he in the so a plant neurobiologist out of
Mhm.
Italy.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it with that. Actually, I will throw one last one at you, Daphne. Was there anything that we didn't ask you that you were excited to discuss, or is there any like last sort of nugget or tidbit that you would like people to think about or be chewing on for the rest of their day?
Mm. We've covered so much, and it's been really fun to be here with you. I've enjoyed it immensely. And I think anything, it would be the remembrance that the smallest action, that whatever we do, the smallest scale action can create. And we have to be so aware of what it is in the larger world and think about those leverage points. What are the leverage points we're working with? How do we identify them? I think, yeah, for the moment, that's what I'd say.
Amazing.
I'm going to say.
Love it.
And thank you guys so much. I mean, I love working with you, and as we are learning this together and understanding what's happening out
Yeah.
there.
Likewise, well, the feeling's definitely mutual. We really appreciate working with you and very inspiring the projects you've got going on.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks so much for joining today and kind of sharing your unique insights and perspective. As I said at the beginning, we'll send out a follow-up email to everyone with the recording. We'll include that book in it. And yeah, keep an eye out for invitations